Deepest pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar on behalf of the Community of Practice on Water and Open Government. This is led by the Stockholm International Water Institute, AVINA Foundation, Water Integrity Network, and the World Resources Institute. Please feel free during this webinar to put your questions in the Q&A, and there is simultaneous translation below in the little world box for interpretation into Spanish. We are thrilled to have you here today to launch the Water and Open Government Declaration with the Open Government Partnership and other partner organizations. For us, this declaration is really important. It's different, but it is something that has been crafted by amazing advocates and institutions, including Article 19, Transparency International, AGVO, the Center for Regulation, Policy and Governance, the African Civil Society Network on Water and Sanitation, Agua and Juventud, CLOCUS, the Young Water Solutions, Senegrap, and the Inter-American Development Bank through an advisory committee to the Community of Practice. All came together during the pandemic with different perspectives to try and bridge the divide between open government movement and the water sector. It was developed through a transparent process, reaching out to the community at large, but also through meetings before the pandemic started, 3 regional meetings with different stakeholders, including government and other organizations that participated in its creation. It's a declaration drafted during the pandemic, and therefore you can understand the urgency of much of its language in this context. We will be providing a link to the declaration to you all during this webinar. So I look forward to the presentations today and the roundtable by all the different participants that we have. And I am going to pass it over to our first presenter, who is Gloria from the AVINA Foundation to begin her presentation.
Thank you, Carol, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We are very excited to join this launch of the declaration with all our partners, as Carol mentioned, and we thank all the speakers that are participating in our webinar to discuss this important topic today. So why to create a water and open government declaration? When we started working as a community of practice, we defined that at the end of our process, we wanted to have a document that could gather all our expectations and that we can invite many participants and many advocates of the topic. So our priority was to define global priorities and open government commitments and water service delivery and measure progress based on commitments that will have impact. Next, please, Corey. This declaration is a comprehensive statement addressing the need for more urgent and ambitious action to commitment achievement, open government in the wash sector to achieve access to clean water and safely managed sanitation. It recognizes that this must be supported by all stakeholders, by governments, youth, women organizations, other civil society organizations, indigenous people, and the private sector. And we try to represent that in the creation of the declaration. The drafting group is formed by these stakeholders, and we want more people to join the declaration and more organizations. Next, please. Why? I think we can go to the next slide. Our goal is to achieve the delivery of WASH in a more transparent, participatory, and accountable way. We think that equitable, timely, and this will serve the most and the most vulnerable groups. So we also try to include representatives from all parts of the world during the declaration drafting process. Next, please. The areas that the declaration cover are transparency, and there are others. Among transparency, we have small sections. For example, water sector financing transparency, service management information, impact data, and WASH information in an emergency. For example, the COVID pandemic. Participation. Participatory governance models, capacity building, multi-stakeholder participation, collaboration. On accountability, we cover responsibility, answerability, and enforceability, and anti-corruption. So we also propose some options to reduce opportunities for corruption and to foster collective action. Next. The drafting group. This declaration was drafted by a broad coalition of civil society and international organizations and the Water and Open Government Community of Practice, an OGP-based network that aims to bring together water and open government experts to accelerate knowledge, sharing and developing of innovative cross-sector approaches to transparent, inclusive, and accountable water and sanitation service delivery. Next. Here, I won't be able to mention all, but we deeply thank all the participants and all the people that give us idea and their inputs and their time to create the draft of the declaration. So thank you all at a personal level. Thank you for all your organizations to be part of this process. We are very proud of what we created together, and we are sure that this document will promote and will be used to create more and better commitments around WASH. Next. So what's the pathway for our declaration? Today, we have the launch of our document and this amazing panel to discuss the opportunities of the document and what are the most challenging issues. The government, the declaration will remain open for endorsements until September 2021. And then we will deliver this declaration to key government focal points around the world, private sector, and other civil society organizations. And also we will share this with key messengers to use the declaration to influence commitments at national and local level into the OGP platform and SDG process. Next. So our goal with this process, with this document, and with this webinar is to foster and to promote open government commitments in water service delivery that are practical, influential, become a global priority. We don't want to leave anyone behind, and we know that this is a pressing issue around the world. So we invite you to check the link of the declaration. There you can sign the declaration, you can share it with all stakeholders, and please contact us if you have any comments. It is an open and collaborative process, so we want to receive your feedback. And please, now the declaration is yours, so please feel free to make comments and to make it yours. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much, Gloria, for that amazing presentation about both the process of creating the declaration, but also the outcomes and the aim and the intention of the declaration. I'm briefly going to introduce the different panelists for our roundtable today to give you a sense who each one of them is and what type of perspective they will bring to the table. I'm going to begin by introducing Paul Massons, who's the Chief of Country Support from the Open Government Partnership. Paul currently leads the implementation of the strategy for OGP engagement with and strategic support for all OGP stakeholders, both at the national and local levels. Both Paul works with both governments and civil society in order to further objectives of the partnership on transparency, accountability, and participation. We also have with us today Marie-Julia Bocco from the Water and Sanitation Unit at the Inter-American Development Bank. She's the lead economist of the Water and Sanitation Division of the Inter-American Bank in Washington, D.C. since 2008. And she has been involved in over 20 countries in the region, designing, evaluating, and executing water and sanitation projects. We also have with us Mova Mohammed Al-Afghani, who is from the Center for Regulation, Policy, and Governance in Indonesia. Mova has his PhD from the University of Dundee, where he's been working in Indonesia over the last many years on the human right to water and on supporting the Indonesia water law and regulation. and specifically working on community water and sanitation. We also have with us Alejandra Jimenez, the Director for the Water and Sanitation Department at SIWI. He leads that department, which provides advice, develops tools and methodologies, and conducts studies, trainings, and workshops on governance issues. And last but not least, we also have Emma Mabalame, who is a Deputy Director for Water Supply Services from the Malawi Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation, and Water Development, who has been working on water sanitation and supply and delivery services for many years. So welcome to all of you. I'm so happy to see you. I would ask that you turn on your videos so we can all see you as we begin this panel discussion. And I'm hoping to make it a real free-flowing discussion, raising different questions with you. I want to actually start off with Paul Massons. I wanted to get from Paul where this declaration fits within the priorities of the Open Government Partnership, and how he sees that this could be taken up and endorsed by both government and civil society. Paul?
Thanks, Carol, and thanks for organizing this. I've been following the water and wash journey in OGP for a few years, and it's really exciting to see the declaration before us. Let me start by applauding basically what Gloria was doing, the working group on its effort and its outcome. I think, as we heard, it was a very collaborative, consultative approach with a strong outcome, which very much fits with the DNA of OGP, which is as much about the quality of the dialogue as the resulting ambitious and implemented commitments. And I think what we have in front of us is a set of remarkably valuable recommendations and suggestions that give both the Open Gov community and the WASH community concrete entry points into using OGP action plans to make reforms in the water sector. In my view, the declaration holds exactly what our communities need. Specific guidance and suggestions for reforms on all aspects of this issue, using open government values and approaches. And I think the introduction of Gloria already explained all the different angles and entry points we have. Now, each section, I think, in itself can challenge OGP members to be more ambitious. It offers these concrete recommendations to a broad range of actors that they can immediately act upon. So it's very much the type of tool that in the past we've seen be instrumental and effective in bringing about change. If you combine it with a strong community on the ground in country that can advocate with governments to make reform commitments, I think you have a very powerful tool. We've seen recent years that topics like gender, but also justice, procurement got a lot of acceleration exactly because there was a tool like this and a strong community around it to push it. So kudos, really strong starting point. Now, specifically on the declaration, I think especially the parts on participation and accountability resonate strongly with me and with our team. And let me specify that a bit. Most OGP members, when they make commitments, especially in the early years, make commitments around the transparency side of whatever sector they're working on, opening up the data, opening up information for citizens and for civil society. But there's only a few that actually have robust commitments that go to participation, and less than half have commitments around accountability mechanisms. This is true in general, but also for the commitments we're seeing in the water sector. So participation and accountability in themselves remain weakly implemented if it comes to OGP, despite often formal regulations being in place. So on participation, for instance, most OGP members have policies, they have regulations, they have laws requiring participation in sanitation, in water hygiene, in water resource management. But in actual practice, only 1 in 10 countries actually implement these policies, and not even in all the areas of the sector, and without evaluation of the quality of participation even. So there's a huge gap between policy and practice where I think the declaration can really help us because it has these very concrete recommendations in it that countries can immediately act upon. Now, what we also see is that even on transparency, although the bar has been raised over the last few years, we're seeing more data coverage, for example. Countries are releasing more data around this sector, but there's still a lot to be done. For example, financial expenditure data is not accessible in many countries. Municipal level data is not accessible. But we're also not seeing it too in many places, data about aspects of service like the equity, the service quality, the reliability, the sustainability of the systems, and change over time. So even when it comes to proactive transparency, which has been improving, there is still a lot to be done. Now, my final 2 points on this point, Carol. Our research shows, OGP is 10 years old this year, and we've done a big deep dive of the data from day one to now, basically. And now, for the first time, we can sort of show that participation works. It works both in the creation of commitments. So if you have solid co-creation like you've done around the declaration in shaping commitments, you get better design, more ambitious commitments. So bringing in citizens and civil society gets you better commitments. But it also shows if you collaborate during implementation of the commitment. So if you continue that collaboration, you actually get better results in terms of delivery of the commitment. But with that, of course, also better results for the citizens. So as OGP, we are very keen to help this declaration being taken up by our members, both our national level members and our local members, working closely with the community of practice, working closely with the broader community. We will encourage our members to use the declaration. It's so easy to use. It can lead to immediate uptake. And we want to work together to jointly push for more ambitious commitments, better delivered, putting citizens and the needs of citizens, and these are very concrete needs we're talking about here today, back at the heart of government. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that kind of introductory remark about the declaration and the space it holds in the Open Government Partnership and how it can be used. I want to pass now for a panel discussion it over to Barbara from WIN, Barbara Schreiner, who is the Executive Director of the Water Integrity Network, for her to lead many of you in a discussion now on where we are and how this declaration can be used during the pandemic and how it can be embraced by different stakeholders. So Barbara, welcome, and I'm happy to pass this panel over to you. I've already done the introductions, Barbara, but please feel free.
Thanks very much, Carol. I realized you had done the introductions. So thanks very much. Let me launch into getting the conversation going with this excellent panel that we have here. And on behalf of the interpreter, if I speak too fast, please wave at me or something, because I do tend to speak rather fast. Alejandro and Emma, I wonder if I could ask you to come in on how has the COVID pandemic changed your view about the importance of open government and WASH in terms of your experience of what's happened over the past 18 months? Alejandro, perhaps we could start with you.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone, and nice to be here. Yeah, the COVID has been a very interesting experience to highlight the importance of open government. We at SIWI had been conducting an overview of the response of more than 80 countries on the WASH aspects in different regions of the world. And actually something, I mean, there are many lessons out of that, but what I want to bring up here is that it was terribly important, the level of trust and previous communication and coordination between the different institutions and with the citizens to make an effective response. So we see that countries that were able to have good channels of communication, quick interaction between the different stakeholders, connection between the utilities, the regulators also understanding what were the needs of the users, and just trying to have the community alive, were much more able to have a better response that could react to the realities on the ground. So actually, that's something I want to bring here, because it underscores the importance of the OGP principles and how this can help in the water sector.
Great,
Over to you.
great. Thank you very much, Alejandra. Emma, from your perspective, what have you seen in the last 18 months that is of interest?
Thank you so much, Barbara. It was, as a country, I think it was like a shock, because the pandemic caught up with us after a couple of months when it was highlighted around the globe. But knowing the essential part that WASH plays in preventing and protecting humanity, more especially when we look at the current COVID pandemic, the country had no option. We had a lot of challenges in terms of financial resources going to the sector, practically how the WASH services were happening, both in the communities, in urban and rural areas. And the return, one of the major factor that happened within us was we had a lot of returnees coming back to Malawi, and they had to be managed, and we had a lot of isolation centers where they had to be contained. So WASH services became one of the most important factor to ensure that we create a barrier for transmission of the COVID pandemic. And also just to indicate that during the recovery kind of phase, there were some secondary impacts that happened that required the WASH service provision to be looked at with a different eye. For example, we had disruption of supply chains in instances because goods and services could not be easily moved. And we also had inability of customers, for example, to pay their bills, which also affected the service providers for water supply and sanitation services. So with this, and looking at how as a country we were faring during that particular time, and the success that we had, knowing that WASH was very an important factor, we saw that government really put all the efforts to ensure that we contain the pandemic. So we learned that it was important for a country, government, to put everything together for us to be able to contain such kind of pandemic, other than relying on the partners that we have. So coordination being led by government was one of the key issues that we learned during this pandemic. Thank you so much.
Great, great. Thank you very much. A very important issue and very strongly linked to the one that Alejandro mentioned about the level of trust and the ability to engage between structures. Paul, if I could maybe ask you, which countries are you seeing that are embracing open government around the WASH commitments? And is there a sense of urgency that you're seeing coming through?
Thanks, Barbara. Not a sense of urgency yet. I think hopefully the declaration can help with it, because as I said, I think it really gives those tools that we're looking for. In my mind, it's a topic that has great potential. I mean, as OGP, we've been saying for a couple of years that we want to go beyond transparency and see more commitments on participation and accountability. We've also said that we want commitments that get closer to the heart of what citizens care about, right? And of course, this is service delivery at large, but water and WASH in that are a key point. So it's a relatively recent topic in the partnership. If you look across, I think about half of our members have made commitments on this, 37, 60 plus commitments. Now that's not nothing, but on a total in the last decade of about 4,500 is not enough either, right? The positive is that most of these are ambitious, much more ambitious than we see in other sectors. So that says something about the strength of the community also in working with stakeholders on the ground, with the governments on the ground, and making sure these commitments are strong. Now, what they span is also interesting, right? So it as you can see from the declaration, the topic, of course, is incredibly broad, And we see that back in the commitments as well. They go from digital mapping of clean drinking water points, collaboration between tenants and landlords around water, inclusively designing national water plans, opening up the spending on water management. So it's a real diverse set of topics we see commitments around. Most of them have come from the Americas. If you purely look at the countries, we see that the Americas are leading commitments in Uruguay, Argentina, Mexico, Chile, Brazil, Paraguay. A little bit in Africa, we see Tunisia, Sekondi, which is a county in Ghana, and Armenia as well. Indonesia is of course working on it, but there is potential for much more. And I think that's where the work of the community of practice has been incredibly helpful, smartly advocating, bringing knowledge, giving examples, practical advice. So I think that has been incredibly helpful. Shall I give one example? I think that might be good of what it looks like. Tiny example.
Yep.
Uruguay, I think, is one of my favorite examples, which is a national water plan where they have gotten participation right, where they didn't just tick the box. So they brought in 2,000 citizens, but also academics, practitioners, etc., into designing a water plan. They had a special panel called Desiagua, nice name, made up of a diverse set of citizens, 15, I think, different ages, backgrounds, etc., in really shaping, deeply engaging over 6 months on what a national water plan should look like. Every aspect: environmental sustainability, spatial planning, drought and flood risk management. So all the aspects you can think of water. And by the fact that they brought in citizens and engaged this bigger group, they in the end had a policy that resonated better with what was actually needed, but it also had more support from the communities because it was co-created with the communities. And I think that's one example of the type of commitments that I would like to see many, many more of.
That's a very interesting example. Thank you. Thank you very much. And that notion of co-creation is an important one. Mova and Alejandro, what commitments do you think are really important in a sense as a minimum threshold for progress? What would you see as being the commitments at a minimum level that you would like to see? Perhaps we can start with Mova.
Thank you, Barbara. I think there are two important commitments. The first is disclosure of water quality status, and the second is public participation in providers' business planning. Well, the first, we know that safely managed drinking water is an SDG target, which entails certain biological and chemical parameters. So in order to understand whether the target is met, we need to have the data disclosed. The disclosure of such information is also important to enable customer to demand accountability to government and to utilities, for example. As for the second one, the public participation in providers' business planning, I think it is important because we need to avoid the capture by special interests when the utilities are extending their network and they have a tendency to extend the network only on profitable areas. So if these are disclosed and that the citizen can comment on that, I think it would be a tremendous support for the SDG fulfillment. Over to you, Barbara.
Thanks very much, Mova. And you remind me that the issue of disclosure of information, of course, is dependent on how it's portrayed, that it needs to be accessible to people. And there's been some very good examples around the world, actually, of disclosure of drinking water quality, sort of on a daily basis, say at the city level, in ways that people can actually get a really immediate feel for what the situation is. Alejandro, from your side, what would you put in there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? And perhaps I would try to say how I see the ladder, no? Because I wouldn't like to stop in the minimum. And I think the absolute minimum is the adequate disclosure of information. And that should be something it's a minimum, but certainly it's not necessarily what is driving the change, because disclosure of information enables some meaningful participation, some informed discussion by the citizens about what is happening. If not, it can't be done properly. But then this needs to lead to what Paul was hinting to, which is accountability. Accountability, because it's not just about putting the information out there or calling for meetings and listening to more or less complaints. It's about acting upon that. It's about justifying what you are doing. It's about why are we taking these decisions and what are we doing with the public money? So I think accountability is for me an end goal here within the commitment. But all of that is just for one reason, is to have better quality of services for the people. If not, we are missing the point. So I would like, you asked me for a minimum. I'm responding with a dream. I would like to see commitments that work along this ladder, but also point out to the last part, because all this would be to have to be able to show that we are improving the quality of the service. And by quality, I of course also include coverage and extension of the services and putting services to the underserved, but also like the quality of the services of those that are served. So not to forget that this OGP in the water sector needs to help us to provide better water services and better water resources management for all. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you, Alejandro. And I'm quite happy to have the dream on the table rather than the minimum. The dream is what we're aspiring to, and it's going to take hard work from all of us to get there. But obviously, the dream is encapsulated in SDGs, and we don't have many years left to reach SDG 6, and we have a massive task ahead of us in terms of getting there. So yes, this is not an end in itself. This is a tool in order to actually ensure that we can achieve universal coverage of good quality services of water and sanitation. Maria, can I ask you a question, bring you in at this point? In terms of the international financial institutions, do you think that there would be a role for them in terms of requiring open government commitments when they're delivering financial packages, or is that an inappropriate or not? Would that not work? Is there something there, or what do you think about it?
Thank you, Barbara. Yes, of course, I think there is a role, and I think the topic has always been on the agenda of the multilaterals. There are key actions where the international financial institutions can play an important role on this. One is to push the open government and transparency agenda among governments and other sector stakeholders. Another one is to develop tools to help sector players at all levels to improve their transparency and integrity practices. And three is to produce knowledge and inform these stakeholders, including civil society, on the impacts or benefits of these practices. And I think in recent years, all these efforts have multiplied, actually. For example, here at the IDB in 2015, a collaboration between the IDB Water and Sanitation Division and the Transparency Fund was born with the aim of supporting key actors, that is service providers and regulatory and supervision agencies, in the design and implementation of transparency policies, mechanisms, and practices in the water and sanitation sector through different activities that support, for example, the preparation of diagnosis to identify weaknesses and the design and implementation of the corresponding action plans to strengthen transparency practices in companies and regulators. Also strengthening of information transparency and management systems and mechanisms with emphasis in using ICTs, information and communication technologies. And as I mentioned, the generation of knowledge and a lot of dissemination activities. All these obviously goes hand in hand with all the work that we have been doing in recent years in corporate governance and commercial management in the water and sanitation operators with the specific tools for this. And with Aqua Rating, there is an instrument to evaluate water operators through benchmarking and performance indicators. So as a consequence of all this work, more and more of our operations are including these tools in their design and implementation. And here is also where we find a key strategic partner in the consortium made up of WIN, SIWAS, and SIWI, which is supporting us using a proven methodology for transparency and integrity in the sector, such as the Integrity Management Toolbox.
Thanks very much for that, Maria. And I'm glad you mentioned Aqua Rating. We are working with Aqua Rating at the moment as well to increase the indicators around integrity, transparency, accountability, participation. So that is an excellent tool. So yes, there are definitely options there, and there's clearly a lot of tools and material that can be used to support these kind of open government commitments as well. But if we look at it from the other side, Mova and Emma, could you perhaps talk to us a little bit about what you think some of the challenges, as well as some of the opportunities might be in trying to adopt the open governance approach? Maybe we can start with Mova.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. I think one primary challenge is still the overall lack of good governance approaches to the wash sector. I know that it has been a talk for more than a decade, and it could be different from one country to another, but at least in the country where I'm from, Indonesia, I think it's still predominantly an engineering solution, and there is a minimal attention from donors and development partners with respect to transparency and accountability. And secondly, I think certain commitment like a disclosure of water quality status that will require certain capacity that needs to be fulfilled. For example, with respect to access to laboratory or testing kit. So we cannot have the transparency of water quality status until the providers or the community-based providers have access to accredited laboratories, for example. Likewise, commitment on the disclosure of compliance to service levels may need to be accompanied by certain rights, such as rebates, which enables customer to take action. In my country, for example, I don't think we have an established customer rights with respect to water. So if there is a disconnection, interruption in the supply, there is nothing that we can do. So in order for these disclosure mechanisms to gain traction, there sometimes have to be enabling environment and capacity. As for the opportunities, I do think that the existing development initiatives, which is already happening, can incorporate open government commitment. The fulfillment of the SDG target on water quality is very well aligned with transparency and accountability mechanism in surrounding water quality. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Emma, from your perspective.
Thank you so much, Barbara. In case of Malawi, we are very much aware that access to basic water services is a human right to every citizen of the country. However, as many African countries are, we still have a couple of challenges to ensure that every citizen have access to either basic or safety managed services in WASH. And as a country, we are also a member of the United Nations. Therefore, we are committed to ensuring that we also meet the SDGs, more especially in this case under WASH, SDG 6.2. That will ensure that everyone have availability and also sustainable water supply for everyone within the country. However, there are a couple of challenges that as a country experience from the country that we face. One of it is the sector has multiple players or institutions that are involved with the issues of WASH within the country. This creates a kind of difficulties in terms of how you can coordinate these players within the country, because various players have overlapping, in certain instances, overlapping mandates toward the same services. Secondly, we have been faced with low budget allocation, especially when we look at the government sources. There have been minimal resources that have been allocated to WASH, and basically we just depend most of the times for huge investment. We have depended on the donor funding. And again, in instances, for example, in the urban water supply services, we've depended on household expenditure to undertake these activities. And again, just to mention that there is also inequities when you look at service delivery linked to access. When you look at the rural setting as well as the urban setting, we have more people accessing water supply in the urban areas, safely managed water supply, but less in the rural areas accessing water supply. In terms of opportunities, because of these challenges that I've just highlighted, just a few of them, one of the opportunities that we've seen coming from the various coordination meetings and discussion is that there is now an impetus and they being enlightened that there is need to prioritize sanitation, because sanitation, as we all know, has always been a child that has been left there, and we have concentrated on issues of water supply. So there is that impetus in that now people have realized that it's important to also look at the issues of sanitation. As basically this has come because of the impact that we've seen. If we are not having adequate sanitation services, especially when it comes to health outcomes, as well as other benefits that come with it when you take the issues of sanitation as a country priority. There's also an opportunity that we have had in that there's need to, as government, to take lead in terms of coordinating these various players. And as government, we've taken a number of activities that we do. For example, we produce a sector performance report every year, and this is discussed at a joint sector review, where all the players, regardless of which constituency you are present. We also have a sector working group. It's a high-level working group, and is chaired by the government, the principal secretary, and co-chaired with a lead development partner at that particular time. And this has ensured that we kind of coordinate the issues happening within the sector. So probably for now, I think this is what I could say. But the major issue is proper coordination, having clear roles and responsibilities would make us move within the sector. Thank you so much.
Great, great. Thank you, Emma, and certainly thank you for raising again the issue of coordination, but also the issue of budget, because part of the process of open government is that it actually should enable a more effective use of available resources, and which is critical. Nobody ever has enough money to do what they need to do. And so the open government approach can play a critical role in that. I want to come to the last question for the panel, and I want to call on Paul and Maria to think a little bit around tell us what you think is kind of some of the most compelling elements of the declaration, and how do you see the uptake of the declaration actually happening at this point? Can we start with Maria?
Yes, thank you, Barbara. The IDB was involved in the declaration development process as So as an organization, we fully support its content, of course. Many of the areas included actually are part of our water and sanitation sector framework, which guides our work for operations design and implementation, and also for knowledge production. Just to mention some of those areas are the inclusion of users or beneficiaries in decision-making on the most appropriate solutions, technical solutions and tariff definitions, especially in rural areas and in marginal peri-urban areas, considering, of course, gender and diversity aspects. The inclusion of civil society in watershed management boards, together with utilities and other sector stakeholders, such as agricultural or industry sectors. The strengthening of transparency frameworks, accountability, and corporate governance of regulatory bodies. That's very, very key on this. That should promote and guarantee communication processes and citizen participation and as direct beneficiaries of the services. At the corporate level, to help establish proper corporate governance mechanisms in the public utilities, including adequate transparency and accountability, of course, and to promote the design and implementation of transparent financing or funding schemes, especially subsidized schemes that need to be targeted to families that would find it hard to pay for their service bills, and with mechanisms that are transparent, objective, and easy to understand for users. And this is key, for example, because according to a World Bank study, on average, more than 50% of subsidies go to the richest quintile, while only 6% go to poorest quintiles. So that's actually a very key aspect to keep in mind. Regarding the uptake of the principles of the declaration, I think, as it was mentioned here, there is a vast consensus that the water and sanitation sector needs to incorporate them at all levels. But of course, as it was mentioned as well, there are important challenges, right? Water utilities are especially vulnerable to integrity failures as they operate as natural monopolies, implement technical, very expensive projects with high capital and maintenance costs. They employ large teams of people and are accountable to multiple stakeholders in a sector that is fragmented. At the same time, being a strategic sector that is key for social and economic development, it makes it vulnerable to political interference. So even though all these factors can undermine the efforts to implement these reforms, at the same time, they make the perfect case for a call to action, in the sense that it's very clear that increasing transparency, accountability, and integrity has a deep impact in utilities and service providers in general, in their performance, making them more efficient, attracting private sector investments, incorporating the innovation, and therefore creating this kind of virtual circle that ends with water and sanitation services, better services for people.
Good. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for raising the issue of subsidies as you were talking about it. I just wondered what the impact would be if the information on where subsidies go was made transparently available to the public. But thank you very much for that. Paul, would you like to come in at this point?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. And I'll start where Maria's left off, which is sort of making life better for citizens, right? Because that's what it's about in the end. Yep. And tying together 2 points in your question. The first one, I mean, the declaration, I said it in my first remarks, there's so much richness in it. I won't do it justice to pick one out, but I'll pick one, which I think builds on where Alejandro was going, which is that point of accountability linked to participation, which I think is still, in many cases, a missed opportunity. If governments have interest in participation, it's often often participation in the sense of shaping policies and shaping services, right? Which is a good start, but it's the same as defining open government just as transparency. It's not enough for open government to work. It's transparency, participation, and accountability. For participation of citizens to work, it is involving them in shaping services, in giving them proper feedback, what you did with what they say, and it's involving them in monitoring. And I think we've seen really good examples of how involving citizens in monitoring actually pays off. We've seen it in Nigeria, where Eyes and Ears project in Kaduna, where the government actually realized they couldn't monitor all the spending and projects they were financing and executing. And they actually explicitly asked citizens to help them with that task. We've seen it in Ukraine, where they've opened up procurement, and they've done it in a way that it's works for government. The value proposition is clear. It just, you get more efficient and effective government, less waste of money. It's effective for the private sector because you get a level playing field. You get more different companies bidding for government contracts, less waste of corruption again. It works for citizens because if there's less waste for corruption, there's more money left for proper services, health, education, water. And society plays an important role in sort of keeping that conversation and dialogue going. So I think there's a strong value proposition that we have to keep reiterating for all actors involved. And I agree with Emma, there are many, that there is a win for everyone in this. Yes, it is, participation is something that is good to do out of principle, but it's also something good to do in practice because it just works. The concrete opportunity for the uptake with OGP this year is very clear to me. We have a record number of OGP members co-creating new action plans, over 100. Half of them are local governments, which of course is where government and citizens meet most directly, where good governance comes alive, where these lived realities that Maria was talking about are directly influenced. And it's also the place where perhaps it's easier to restore a little bit of the trust of government in its citizens and of citizens in government. So I think from our perspective as OGP, we very much encourage the uptake of the declaration. It's rich and immediately useful for many of our stakeholders, but for ourselves as well as the community here, I would say use those 100 action plans that are being co-created in 2021 to make sure there's a big uptake of this topic in OGP.
Thanks, Paul. And on that note, there is actually a question from one of the participants that follows on rather nicely from that I think you can respond to, which is what steps can the OGP take to ensure water and WASH stakeholders are meaningfully involved in the commitment making process at both national and local level? Are there any steps needed to bring in more water actors to the OGP space?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think it's, look, OGP in the end, of course, it is a partnership in itself, right? It is the 150 or so local and country governments. It is the 3,000 civil society organizations that participate. But actually, it's thousands and thousands of individual reformers that use this platform to connect, right? So getting commitments in an action plan, in my experience, the most important always is for local actors to take this conversation into the OGP dialogue. That's not something that can be mandated top down. We've worked very hard to make sure OGP is bottom up and not top down. But it helps if you have entry points. So for example, we have Emma on the call from Malawi. I don't know if Emma is part of the open government conversation in Malawi, but that for me would be one of those concrete starting points. If this topic is not part of the conversation around open government yet, in Malawi, connecting Emma to her counterparts that are working on open government and seeing what the political potential is and the civil society interest is in making commitments in this space, that's where it starts. But it always starts with conversations between reformers on the government side, on the civil society side, and in the private sector. Ideally, as many of them locally, supported by the international community. Because as I said, our model really is fostering domestic dialogue and strengthening domestic reformers, supported by the international community.
Good. Thank you very much for that. I think that helps to make it very clear. There's one more question from the floor, and I think we have time for a short answer. And Alejandro, I'm going to put you on the spot on this one. The question is why do we have problems with implementing public participation and accountability policies within government? And I know you could write a PhD on the answer, but I'm asking you to give us the quick and dirty.
Some factors might be compounding to the lack of effectiveness of that. One is real political will to do it. Another thing would be capacity and resources to really make that happen, because these aspects need to be well planned. You need to, if you want people's participation, you need to use the appropriate channels, you need to plan it in advance, you need to release the information, you need to engage with them, make them aware that they can participate. So it's not like just let's do it. You need some steps in that, and also some capacities, resources, and above all, the real will to really do it, and to take on the take on the inputs and tailor what you are planning. That is really critical, because it's a fake participatory process, and so you need to have your built-in flexibility in what you are proposing, be it a policy, plans, or whatever tariff setting. You have to be ready to modify your initial proposal to cater for citizens' inputs. If not, we are just again diminishing the trust rather than increasing it.
And perhaps linked to that, part of the challenge is to get decision makers to understand that the investment in transparency, accountability, and participation is actually a worthwhile investment, because actually it results in better use of limited resources and better service delivery in the end. And it's not a nice to have or an add-on. It's actually makes for better service delivery and better governance and use of resources. So thank you very much, panel. On that note, I think we are in the process of running out of time. So I'm sure we could talk about these issues for a long time. And I do hope that the people who are listening in will continue to talk about these issues for a long time and continue to take action on the issues. I think we've heard some very interesting things around the need for coordination, how transparency is important, but it's not enough, that accountability is a critical part of what we're looking at. And that as well as accountability, participation needs to be real participation, including in, for example, things like monitoring. I think we've heard about the critical importance of utilities in this, and also then how the open government process is actually a bottom-up process that needs to be driven by the affected people in the particular local area or country, and it's not a top-down, hello, we're coming to impose this on you. At the same time, there is a strong role for the IFIs to actually guide a much more open and transparent approach. So, I mean, I think significant progress has been made around bringing WASH stakeholders together with the open government principles and trying to make those linkages, but I think it's a process that needs a lot more work and can be taken forward. We know that water and sanitation is one of the priorities topics in OGP, particularly because of the links with access to water and sanitation in terms of underpinning a whole lot of of the SDGs, education, gender equity, health and well-being, reduction of hunger, zero hunger, all of those. But it's still incipient, and we heard the number of commitments. We need to upscale those commitments, and that's not only up to OGP, that's up to us as water sector players to promote that upscaling and see that open government gets taken on much more strongly. I think there are a number of challenges in this regard around collecting the data before it can even be made transparent. Finding ways to publish budget and financial expenditure information in ways that are truly accessible to and understandable by communities. I think there's been a lot of work done around that, so we're certainly not inventing a new wheel in that regard. And I think what we've heard is that it really bringing together stakeholders around these issues is incredibly important, taking a multi-stakeholder approach to this. And one of the things that we also need to see is how we can bring together much more strongly the water sector players and the bodies responsible for open government and for transparency, accountability of the water sector and the anti-corruption bodies, and bring those together to build a stronger network around this. So you had a presentation on the declaration. The declaration is available for everybody to look at, and it has some concrete recommendations around transparency, participation, accountability, and anti-corruption. But I think what is important is that the declaration is not cast in stone. It needs to be a living document, and this process needs to be a living process that we can learn from what has worked, what has not worked, because what has not worked is as important to learn from as what has worked, and take it forward and continue to develop the process of open government in the water and sanitation sector, as was pointed out, with the ultimate objective that what we are trying to do is to provide decent water and sanitation services to everybody. And that has to be the driver that is behind everything in this. And on that note, I'm going to hand over back to Carol. And I'm sorry, we're a couple minutes over time, Carol, but over to you.
Thanks so much, Barbara, for your expert handling of this panel and roundtable. I think it was wonderful, and thanks for your summary. I wish we could just take that one piece and broadcast it out as part of the launching of the declaration, because it was really excellent. So thank you everyone for joining us. We want to thank also our interpreter, Zayan. We hope that this was very meaningful for you all. And please visit the SIWI site, where we have the declaration, and the OGP site for the community of practice, so you can endorse the declaration and share it in both the OGP, the open government community, and the water sector. So thanks very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.